Hey guys, so it is November 21st, and I know it's been a little bit since I last did one of these, and I'm sorry. The last couple of days I've just been distracted, and I keep staying up late and forgetting stuff, and I'm sorry. So, doing an entry tonight. I'll try and do another one tomorrow. There is probably something I'd like to talk about, but it would take way more than 10 minutes to explain everything. But, yesterday, I finally went out. I have had this theory for, the genetics of Sonic characters for ages, and I use it when designing, next-gen characters and parents and stuff like that. And I finally took the time out to sort of write out how my little headcanon theory works, although I mostly just explained fur pattern and stuff. I'll give some fairness, and I'm willing to operate on the Archie comic logic that characters pretty much have, either one race or the other, so, if your parent is, a hedgehog and a cat, then the kid will either be a cat or a hedgehog, not a combination of both. And to be fair, I could see that design logic making sense because some animal combinations might look kind of freaky, to give some credit. But in any case, so I am not going to explain the entire thing here, because that would take way too long, but I will show you some of the notes, and I will link in the description so you can go and read the whole thing for yourself. But on a side note, allow me to talk about the Archie comics for a minute, because I really want to talk about this in particular. The whole point of me posting up this guide is so that other people can use this when designing their next gens if they want. You don't have to use my system, but I feel like I came up with a pretty good system for how this works, and if someone else wants to use this, you're welcome too. I mean, you sometimes get these designs that people will come up with that are probably genetically impossible, or at least really, really unlikely. But then again, on the flip side, I would, fuck. While I do see some people creating next-gen OCs occasionally that look like they're impossible, that is much better than the reverse problem. I'll say this much, I would much rather you create a next-gen OC that doesn't look like they could actually be related to the person in question than creating a next-gen OC that looks exactly like them. And this is why I wanted to bring up Archie and I wanted to talk about this. Archie commits what is kind of a cardinal sin in my eyes when it comes to character design, at least, and that is the Generation Xerox phenomenon. The term Generation Xerox, as far as I'm aware, this term usually refers to next-gen characters, but in relation to how I'm going to be using it, I can say that if you create parents for an existing character, they can also be a Generation Xerox. What Generation Xerox essentially means is that the person in question looks absolutely identical to their offspring. Archie does this constantly, and it really pisses me off. Sonic's parents look exactly fucking like him. The only difference is that Bernadette has yellow bangs and blue eyes, but outside of that, they look just like Sonic. And this problem is doubly worse with Sally, whose parents are literally completely identical apart from the gender. In fact, Sally's parents look so similar that I am tempted to believe that she is inbred, because that's the only justification I can see for why they would look exactly alike. This is bad design. And then on top of it, Sonic and Sally had kids in the comic, and their kids are just a clone of Sonic with blue eyes and a clone of Sally with green eyes. This shit is lazy, and it's bad, shitty design. Now, I guess I'll start by talking about what this stuff actually indicates on from a genetic perspective. If we're going to start talking about genetics, I'm not actually sure if it's even possible that Sonic and Sally's kids could look so goddamn similar. It's not impossible, and I'll explain how it is possible that their kids could look like that, but when you get the explanation as to the only way that I could see this happening, you'll start to realize just how problematic this actually is. But the other thing I feel like pointing out is the inbreeding thing. You do not want to imply, whether intentionally or not, that your character is inbred. But that's the only thing I can think of when I see Sally's parents. All I can think of is that she must be inbred. That is the only logical explanation. At least with Sonic's parents, they're similar enough, they're just different enough that I can believe them being two people that just coincidentally look kinda similar. Like, you know, they're essentially both blue hedgehogs. But outside of both being blue hedgehogs, they do actually have enough different traits that, yeah, I'll buy it. But Sally's parents? No, they are exact clones of each other. And here's the thing, there are some old cartoons, like, you know, old Disney cartoons, for example, Mickey Mouse, Minnie is just a female version of Mickey, but the difference is in those old cartoons, the genetic variety of a Disney mouse was not very high. They were black and white cartoons, which means there were only so many genetic features that Mickey or Minnie could have. They, of course, were gonna both be black mice because it was a black and white cartoon. You only had two options. The character is ostensibly white or they are black. One of the two. So, you know, it makes sense that they look so similar considering the context. This is not the case with the Sonic universe. The Sonic universe has characters that come in such a wide variety of colors it would make your head spin, so the idea that two people would meet each other and happen to have the exact same pattern, color, eye color, and be the same race just baffles me. There's no differences. They're even the same fucking height, for God's sake. So yeah, no. The reason this is bad, lazy design, though, really isn't just because of the genetics. It's because what you do when you create characters like that is you communicate to your audience that you are not interested in actually writing a character. All I can see when I look at these characters are placeholders, which should have characters in them but don't. They don't register as real characters. They're just roles in the story. This is Sonic's mom. This is Sonic's dad. This is Sally's mom. This is Sally's dad. These are their kids. They don't have actual character. They're just meant to be placeholders and plot devices or whatever. They're not meant to really, you know, exist on the same level that the main characters do. And that's frustrating because it'd be so much better to actually create real characters to fill those places rather than waste time with people that don't seem to matter. Now, to give it some credit, as far as I can tell, Bernadette and Jules do have some personality to them, so I'll give them some credit where it's due. They're not that bad, but still, you could have been so much better about this. Actually, one thing that I kind of wonder about the Archie comics is why they didn't use Alina from Sonic Underground. Hell, you could have even used Manic and Sonia too. In fact, they named Sonic and Sally's kids Manic and Sonia, so it's not like they weren't aware. I don't know, maybe these characters were created before Sonic Underground was a thing. If that's the case, then you're welcome to correct me in the comments and let me know. But if that's not the case, then why didn't you just use those? And if the answer is, oh, well, Sally's parents were supposed to be the king and queen of Mobius, and we can't have two queens of Mobius, now can we? Then my answer to that is Mobius is an entire fucking planet. Just make Alina the queen of a neighboring country. There. Problem solved. Anyway. Oh, I did say I was going to give some explanations as to how Sonic and Sally's kids could potentially look the way that they do, using my own little genetic system, which, again, you can read in the link below to see how I work this stuff out. But, I will probably draw up a whole diagram of that family tree later to explain how it might work, and, you know, I will probably show that to you guys tomorrow night in the next diary entry. But for now, the long and the short of it is, the only way that Sonic and Sally could produce children that look the way that they do would actually require for one or the other of them to be mixed. So in other words, either Sonic has a great-grandparent who is either a chipmunk or some other race that is recessive to the chipmunk gene, or Sally has either Sonic has a grandparent that is either a chipmunk or some race that is recessive to chipmunk genes, or Sally has a grandparent who is a hedgehog, or is of some race that is recessive to hedgehog genes. Because, and I say it that way because Archie seems to imply that these racial genes are so inextricably linked that a person is either one or the other, which is fine. It makes things a little simpler and easier on my behalf. I'm just making that point. It also means that one or the other of them probably carries a lot of recessive genes, and given the way I've structured everything, it's most likely Sonic who's carrying more of the recessive genes. A lot of which I have attributed to his mother, although I guess I did put some on his dad. You'll see the chart tomorrow and see me work out the logic. But the reason that I think this is interesting to point out is, wouldn't it be so much better if you had just made, Sally's parents an interracial couple? If you had just given Sonic's parents different features and hair colors? So that, then they could have children that showed, genetic components of both of their parents, or maybe even just inherited stuff that was passed down from their grandparents. My point is, the only way the kids could look like this is if their the only way that Sonic and Sally's children could look like this is if both of them had far more interesting looking grandparents than their actual parents. And that's sad to me, because that means that essentially this part of the family that we're going to choose to show the audience is the most boring part of the family. When you start playing around with genetics, you can actually use them to come up with some pretty fun and creative design concepts. A lot of my genetics theory used Sonic Underground as the family example that I started building my theory around. I know that might seem like an arbitrary place to start, but I felt like it was a good place to start since Sonic's family in Underground clearly has a lot of genetic variety, with each of his siblings being a different color. So I built my theory around that so that family could conceivably look this way within the model that I've constructed. And in my own Sonic comic, which does have a next generation to it, and even gives a number of characters' parents, I used Sonic's mother, Alina, from Sonic Underground and made that his mother in Reborn. Mind you, Alina's not a queen, although she did come from a family that held a political office at one point in time. But one interesting thing that came as a result is that since I used the same parents for Sonic that I would use in, say, a Sonic Underground fic, the genetics were the same. Even though Sonic Reborn gives Sonic a different brother instead of using Mannequin Sonia, there's a reason for that that would take too long to explain here. But it was kind of interesting, because then when I was playing around with Sonic and Amy and what kind of offspring that they could produce, I already had their daughters, and their daughters really didn't change as a result of any of this, but it was interesting seeing what other possible combinations could come out of that. One particularly interesting thing that came up was that Sonic would only be able to produce sons with green hair. If he and Amy had a son, their son would have green hair, despite the fact that neither Sonic or Amy are green. This has to do with Sonic possessing a genetic trait for green hair that is recessive to the blue, but when paired off with the magenta color that they might inherit from Amy, ends up being dominant to that. So, and the green-haired trait is on Sonic's Y chromosome. That's what determines male, because he inherited that from his dad. That's why, like I said, if he had any sons, they would all be green, or some variety of green. Because, in order to get a boy, Sonic would have to pass down the Y chromosome, and his blue, what I refer to as color modifiers, his blue modifier is on the X chromosome. So, he passed that down to his daughters, and his daughters would all be some shade of blue or purple, but his sons would all end up being green, which is kind of interesting. I'm just saying, you can get some interesting outcomes when you play around with genetics like this, and you can end up designing kids that actually make sense on a genetic perspective, but have designs that are distinct from their parents. Your kids don't have to be a fucking clone of their parents, I guess that's all I'm really getting to. Even if you're trying to make children who make sense on a genetic level, you can still design characters that are not just identical clones of their parents and justify it with genetics. I'm not saying everyone needs to go through and take all the time to study genetics that I did, and if you want to, you are welcome to use my genetic model when designing your own characters. In fact, I might even encourage people to use it. I think it's a good model, and I'll stand by it. I mean, it takes some liberties, because Mobians are fictional creatures, but, as you do. But I'll say this much, even if your character doesn't make any genetic sense, I'd still rather that than the fucking Generation Xerox bullshit. Just because Archie did it, and Archie are quote-unquote professionals, doesn't mean that you should do it. You can do better than this. Be creative. Generation Xerox is lazy, and it ends up making you look like you're not actually designing real characters. When designing a next-gen, try and, not just on design, not just on how they look, try and be sure to give your next-gen characters actual personalities, too, by the way. Don't just make their personalities clones of their parents, either. It's not enough that they should look different. They should act different, too. I mean, I'll ask this much. Are any of you listening to this video exact doppelgangers of your parents? Do any of you just look and act just like your parents? The answer is probably no. At least with most people. In the case of my own next-gen, Sonic's daughters both have personalities that are neither clones of Sonic or Amy. One of them is kind of narcissistic and sort of acts like the world revolves around her. She's a perfectionist. She's very intelligent, but not very wise. She's kind of emotionally immature. She throws tantrums. The other daughter, by comparison, may come across as an underachiever, but that's because she prioritizes being happy over being successful. She's more outdoorsy than her sister, and she tends to take everything that happens in stride. I wouldn't call her necessarily excitable, hyperactive, or adventurous like Sonic, or cocky even. She's pretty modest, mellow, and down to earth. She's a sweet girl who doesn't let things get to her. While her sister is somebody who constantly thinks the world should revolve around her and throws tantrums when the world refuses to conform to what she thinks it should be. And I think those make for pretty interesting personalities, and they make for an interesting dichotomy. The girls play off of each other in funny and cute ways, and they play off their parents in funny and cute ways. So, yeah, give the kids actual personalities. If you're unsure what to do when coming up with a personality for your character, by the way, this is actually a bit of advice I'll give to anybody who doesn't know what to do when creating a personality for a character. Look up the Myers-Briggs personality test. I'll say right here and now, it's not actually all that scientific, just so you know, this isn't really real psychology. The Myers-Briggs personality test was created by a couple of writers a long time ago, but the significance of it is, yeah, it was created by writers, but for that very reason, it's actually a really good tool for writers to use. Whenever I'm stumped on a character and I'm not totally sure what they would do in a situation, or I just want to help better contextualize or define what my character's personality is to others, I will usually take the Myers-Briggs test. I'll answer each question the way I think that the character would probably answer that question, and then I'll read through the article for the answer I get. I'll put a link to that actually down in the description too, so you guys can do that. I find this is a really good exercise for helping me to define my character's personalities, and I'll probably be doing this test for Sonic's daughters later and getting their personality scores, and I might share that with you guys in the next video. So yeah, if you're unsure what to do in that department, you can always use this as a starting point. Now, I'm not saying that you should write your character exactly to their Myers-Briggs thing. You can deviate from their personality type a little. It'll depend on the story and what's happening and what's shaping your character. Your characters should be shaped by the things that happen to them to some extent, so keep that in mind. But I'm just saying, it's a good starting point to build off of when you're developing a personality. It gives you a very solid foundation to work with. Anyway, I have way talked longer than I normally should in these videos, probably because I waited too long to make one, and thus as a result I ended up having diarrhea of the mouth because it's been a while since I've been able to just ramble like this. So, thank you for listening to my 20-minute rambling session. I hope you all have a nice day. I will probably go to bed in a couple hours. Good night, guys.